Hello and welcome to the Money Follows the Person Open Doors webinar. Today we're talking with Steve Holmes from SANYS, the Self-advocacy Network for New York State, and he is going to tell us about the progress for the MFP program, the things that have been happening, the exciting things that have been happening. And I just want to do a few housekeeping things first. First of all, everyone is on mute, which means that if you talk, we can't hear you unless you raise your hand. If you'll notice on the screen, you'll have a box that allows you to raise your hand. You can also use the question box to type in questions. Either one is fine, and Steve is absolutely fine with answering questions. So again, you can either raise your hand or ask a question by typing it in. And without further ado, let me introduce Steve Holmes from SANYS. He's their director. Take it away, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm using a headset, and I think it's probably going to be good. So the first slide, well, first let me introduce myself. As Suzanne said, I work for the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State for the board. I've had this job for over 22 years now, and prior to that I was an executive director of a provider agency here in New York for 10 years, and prior to that I worked in Massachusetts where I was an executive director of an agency, and I had been a direct support staff and a program manager. And in my early years, in 69, 70, and 71, I worked in 2 institutions in Massachusetts. So I've pretty much been involved with just about every possible way you could support people with disabilities, especially over the years. And I'm really excited about doing this presentation. This is more of a broader overview, too, about SANYS and the work we're doing in trying to transform the system, along with OPWDD and many other advocates and NYAIL and many other groups. And so I'll just start out with the first slide. And the first slide is the title of the presentation. It's also the title of our conference this year, which was this past weekend. And I'm really excited to say we had over 850 people at the Marriott, 800 and something people who are actually registrants, and about 40 or 50 volunteers and speakers, and just an incredible, energizing event. So it was a great weekend. So if you could move on, and SANYS is an organization that was formed by Bernard Carabello back in 1986. We became a nonprofit organization in '88, and it's an organization that is run by and for people with developmental disabilities. And we have a board of directors made up of people who are elected democratically from throughout the state, and we have in our regions, and been a very active organization, and we're very much committed to transforming the system, which is basically what we've been trying to do for the entire existence of our organization. So the first slide is about choices. One of the ways we've been expressing change is by promoting choices, and that's something we've been doing quite a bit. This is not our current board, but it's a board from last 2 years ago, and we have, again, we're made up of board members who are elected in the regions, and they serve 3-year terms. They're all staggered so that people aren't changing every year at the same time. And we have an executive committee that spends a lot of time in Albany, and we meet with legislators and advocate with OPWDD and other state agencies. So you can move on, Suzanne. So I'm going to just show you a couple of slides from our last few conversations. We've been using the term transformation to trigger a message about what we've been doing this year. This year, of course, it was Transformation is Us, our lives, our choices, our community. People that I work for and that many of you on the phone work for and on behalf of, want to live lives just like everybody else in your community, want to have choices. And when we talk about people, we mean all people. And one of the things our board has been saying of late is transformation, and this is in a policy statement we made, transformation is us, all of us, And what they mean by that is all people with developmental disabilities and other disabilities, even people who need a lot of help to speak for themselves or people who cannot speak for themselves without assistance. It's about all of us. It's also about direct support, staff of organizations, and really about everybody who's doing the work, this important work, to help people get the life that they want. So how about the next slide, Suzanne? So just to give you another sense of just some of the last few years, I'll just flip through these slides quick, the last few years of conferences. Several years ago, we created a conference called Me to We, Yes We Can. It was a theme of David Liscombe, our board president at the time, and what we were talking about is this hopeful that people would have a sense of fairness and a real people-first point of view will be in everyone's mind as we work together. So, when we look at how we spend money in New York State, we advocate that it be on a people-first basis, and that there be a sense of fairness about how we go about. And fairness means that people get the supports they need, families who are waiting for services get supports in a reasonable time, and that we all work together to try to transform and change our system. So that you can, great. So here's just an example of Me to We, this little cartoon by Mr. Fish. I don't know if anybody have seen some of Mr. Fish cartoons. It's called Activism, and in Mr. Fish's cartoon, the we's are infiltrating the me's, and that's something that we're trying to make happen with getting everybody to work together. So next slide, Sue. Thanks. So here's another one of our themes of recent years. 2013 was SANYS U, which was one of our projects that we have. But the second, it was a sub-theme, was Reimagining Our Future. And reimagining our future is what we really believe we have to do. We have to reimagine and rethink and change the way that we provide services compared to the way that we provide them at this point, especially for people with developmental disabilities. So you can go to the next slide. So when we were looking at reimagine, the word reimagine has a dictionary definition, and it means to reinterpret an event, a work of art, etc. We would also say a system of support for people with developmental disabilities and for other disabilities, imaginatively, and to rethink. The next one is transforming our system, which was in 2014, and reinvesting in us. And the reinvesting in us part is we want to make sure that the entire transformation of OPWDD system is geared towards reinvesting funds that are in the system towards more individualized supports, more person-centered supports, as has been OPWDD's theme and intention. And if there's any, and I think one important point that we are making as part of the transformation committee that OPWDD has is that if there is any funds that are created through reinvestment or through change, that those dollars be reinvested in the system, especially in the cost of transformation, to support the cost of transformation, and just as importantly, and maybe more importantly, to support people who are still waiting for services. So next slide, thanks. Here's an example. This is just a logo from last year's conference that was created by Wenceslo Herrera from Long Island, and Wenceslo spends his entire day actually in a rehabilitation program, but he entered this logo for a contest and won. And if you look at the logo, you'll see that despite the fact that Wenceslo spends most of his day in a day hab, he is very much thinking about the things he does in the community, playing basketball, swimming, being at the library, sports, and going out to eat and taking trips and all that kind of things. Those are the things that people want to be doing with their lives, as opposed to spending their whole day in centers or in doing things that they haven't, having more choices about the things that they do. That's what we have choices is about. So go ahead, Suzanne. So just a couple of things about how we approach choice. This is something that we created in 2006, actually, that we're still promoting. It's called Willpower, and we have choices. And over the years, people have thought that people with developmental disabilities should have a choice of where they live and what jobs or what they do during the day. But one of the things that people with disabilities have told us is that people want choices of all kinds of things, and that their choices are not just those two things. Those choices are work, learning and teaching. Self-advocacy is a form of teaching, but learning. Many people are spending their days not just in day centers, but in classrooms and in community classes, and doing all kinds of things where they have opportunities to learn, taking lessons, getting different skills, and going to college and community college and non-credit courses. Neighborhood and community membership is an incredibly important part of the discussion that we are having, all of us, in terms of not only money follows a person, but in terms of transforming our system. The neighborhood and community membership is how people, by being neighbors and by being members of community, people are safer. People live fuller lives, people have friends, and that I would suggest that for those of you who are familiar with the home and community-based setting rule, that the home and community-based setting rule is about neighborhood and community membership. And that is one of the ways that people have a life and have an extended network of friends in their life. That is not true of many people currently supported by OPWDD and many other systems in the country. Creative expression is another thing that people have an opportunity to do. Music, dance, art, writing, all kinds of ways that people can, and they can do this through classes and through things that they do during the day and through their own individualized supports. Sharing lots of time with family and friends, reuniting people with family, encouraging and supporting people to develop friends and contacts and people who are their allies and support. Those are all really important things that we do with resources and that we do when we enable people to live in their community and with their friends and with friends and neighbors and people that they know, with the supports that they need. Having a home life, every single person that gets supported by any state agency should have, and who to live someplace should have the sense that that place is their home. That's one of the strong intentions and beliefs of the Self-Advocacy Association, the people I work for. People should feel at home where they live. It's got to be their home. It doesn't have to be a home that they own. It doesn't even have to be a home with their lease, their name on the lease, although those two things are really important, but they have to have some control. I'll go back to the HCBS settings rule for those of you familiar with that. We embrace the concepts of that enable people to have some of that power. The other very critical thing for people is spiritual and religious life. People have to have an opportunity to be connected with community churches and synagogues and any place where people are pursuing spiritual activities. And it's funny, when I just tell a quick story. When I was an executive director of an agency, I talked to some managers who work for us, and I had been reading about the importance of spiritual and religious life. I'm talking about probably 90 or 89, something like that. And I encouraged all the managers to support people to go to church. And I did this, I think, on a Friday or a Thursday. And Monday morning, I got a call from a friend of mine who was the pastor of the Quaker church, and he said, "Well, Steve, something kind of odd happened Sunday, but a whole van from your organization showed up, and there were 9 people in the van, and they all came to our meeting. We only have 12 members, so if anybody knows what a Quaker meeting is like, it's you sit silently and kind of speak when you're moved to. They had a small group of 12 people, and suddenly they had 9 people from our group, and it was a little bit hard to incorporate and include 9 people into the Quaker approach to a religious service. And I immediately realized what a mistake I had made, and I got together that week again with the managers. I said, "Look, I really screwed up. I told you to bring people to church, and I encourage you to do that. But what I didn't talk to you about was how important it was to take some time to do this, to find out what churches people want to go to, and support people to attend individually the churches that they choose, or that they may have chosen, but they may have had some involvement with it in a younger time, but the idea is not to have a whole group of people go to church together." And that's how we did things in the 80s and 90s and 70s, and prior to that time, people always did things by groups. And so that was one thing, one mistake I made. The other thing on the wheel is sports and adventure. Adventure includes includes vacations and getting out of their state and going places and playing sports and activities, gyms, again, as much as possible and to the greatest extent possible in community activities. You know, joining the Y, not the specialized class, is what we really are envisioning, what people are asking for in their lives. So next slide. So here's the things that now we're talking, these are things that SANYS have been talking about for a long time. And we organized a think tank, and this is preceding anything called Money Follows a Person, but these are things that we were working on then, and so and other organizations were working with as well. And when we got together as a group, we came up with what we thought were the partners that were needed for change. And there were 6 partners, and there's probably lots more, but these are the 6 partners that we put together. Self-advocates, families, community members, direct support allies, which are now called, in our field now called direct support professionals, provider organizations, OPWDD, which was OMRDD when we created this slide, and those 6 entities and any others that we can think about. And OPWDD also includes other state agencies. I know there's some folks from DOH on the phone, and it also includes other state agencies. And those 6 groups, or how many groups we need to be partners for change, we need to share passionate leadership and a value-based philosophy. You know, a belief that people can live in the community with the supports they need no matter what disability they have, and that we're passionate about making those things happen. And you'll find a lot of passionate leaders among self-advocate leaders I'm privileged to work for, and I think throughout our field there are a lot of people who are passionate about this work, and we need that passion, especially going forward in you know, some challenging times, perhaps. So next slide, Suzanne. So here's a slide that we put together, and this slideshow I put together, and our board has approved, and we've been using this slide. Sometimes I present with self-advocates, and other times I present to agencies, organizations, as we're doing today, groups as we're doing today. So here's what. And this probably, a lot of this comes from my experience, and I explained my experience in the beginning of the slide. But if you look at why New York is having some challenges right now, and this really, I think, puts some perspective on it, and some people on the call may not know this. I know that there are many people who this information may have been lost over the last 10 years or so, but there were more than 25,000 people living in 22 institutions in New York State in the 1970s and into the 80s. And we as a state in the 80s, and for those of you who have seen Arthur Webb around these days, he's doing some consulting. He was a former commissioner of OPWDD. When he became commissioner, he activated a plan to close many of the other institutions. Willowbrook was closed and a few others had closed, but we still had thousands of people. And all told, we had 25,000 or more people. Some people say 28,000 altogether, but there were 22 institutions. Willowbrook was not the only one. One was the Bronx Developmental Center, and I mean, a good example of some of the problems that we have in our state, and this is related directly to the Money Follows the Person project, is the 12-person homes that we have in our state. Currently, we have, and I believe these statistics are correct from OPWDD's 2012 report that they gave, and I don't think they've changed much. We have over 18,500 people living in places with more than 8 people. Many, many, many of those folks, probably the vast, vast majority, are people who are living in places that came from the closure of institutions during the 80s and early 90s, and before the waiver. This was before the waiver, which means the waiver, the home and community-based waiver came in, I believe, in 1989-90, and prior to that time, the choice for services for people living outside their home or outside of institution was an ICF, a state fund group home. Those are the 2 residential choices, and also and for day services it was a day treatment, and there was some employment but not much. So they were basically Medicaid funded services, but funded in the ICFs and the day treatment were very medical models, and we virtually had I can't tell you the total amount of people that moved out during that time, but 25,000 people over a period of time moved into the community. And much of what we have now is part of the legacy that we need to undo. So some of the reason why some of us see OPWDD service right now, services, the distribution of their services is upside down from the way they need to be. We need people to be living in their own homes, in neighborhoods, in communities. That's certainly what CMS is pushing the systems to do, but it's also what people want. And it's one of our challenges is the legacy of the past and all of those large houses that still exist. You know, for example, I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about. In Rome, New York, Rome was one of the institutions where people moved in from local communities, but many people moved upstate from New York City into Rome. And Rome has, on one street, it's not co-located on the old Rome grounds, which are now a prison, but it's about a quarter of a mile. But it's the next thing. There's nothing in between these houses and the prison. On one road, there are 5 12-person state-operated facilities. That's 60 people living in essentially a neighborhood with no other neighbors, in contiguous addresses. The HCBS settings rule. The only way to look at that is that's a 60-person heightened scrutiny situation, and we have a number of situations like that. Again, it's a legacy of that time. So the long-term thing, when you think about that situation, is there a need in Oneida County, which has 40,000 people, for those 5 houses, and for 5 other houses like that are spread over another street, but over a mile, for another 60 people, and for the other 120 people who are living in 12-person houses in the 22 or so houses that they have in Oneida County, a 40,000 person county with way more people nobody needs to live in those settings from our point of view, but very, very high concentration of people living in those kinds of settings. But that's part of the legacy. In another county, in Fulton County, which has another county with about 40,000 people, they have 20 12-person houses. And again, that's a legacy. I'll just give a quick story about that. I was in a meeting this is just to understand how we got into the challenge we're in. I was in a meeting in 1986, my second year as an executive director. A DDSO director came into the meeting with a bunch of directors and said, one of you are going to walk out of this room with 5 12-person houses and one 60-person day treatment program, but you have to develop those houses by the drop-dead date at the end of the year. The drop-dead date was April 1st. March 31st, that meant that if you didn't, I'm not sure what happened, but if you didn't spend your money by the end of that date, you were in big trouble. There might be somebody on the phone who might know what actually would happen to agencies that didn't. But that was the absolute, you had to get things done by the deadline. And ironically, it was August 3rd that the director asked this to happen, 7 months. And that person was able to develop those 7. One person raised a hand, said, I can do it. I raised my hand, said, this is crazy. You can't do all this in one time. And the director turned to me and said, Steve, that's why we didn't think that you would be involved in this at all. And of course I wasn't. And but the director who said yes built those 12-person houses, 6 of them, and had a day treatment up and running for 60 people. By the time, and he did it because he had land, he had community that would not be in opposition, and because Arthur Webb created, in his effort to get people out of these horrible places, he created 5 or 6 models that were pre-approved plans. So all you needed was a piece of land, good water, and a community that wouldn't be resistant, and you could build houses. And we did it all over the state. And so that's part, and again, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this because a lot of what CMS is concerned about are these sites themselves. So the second part that I want to mention is a reluctance to embrace the HCBS community based waiver in the 1990s. We were used to building houses, and as a state, we just didn't. Despite the fact that many of us at the time, including Max Shimura, who many know as commissioner, Max Shimura's task in 1991 was to help OPWDD develop a broad-based waiver. Participation in the waiver help providers, and we weren't as successful as we could have been. We were successful in supporting 4,000 people to get support at home, in their home communities, in their home, but we weren't as successful in creating the kinds of innovative options that people had started doing then. So states, for instance, like Vermont and New Hampshire in the 1990s, 1995, I think, 4, 5, 6, they closed their institutions using the waiver. So instead of using an ICF and a day treatment, they used the waiver model, which allowed Vermont to use a life-sharing model where they virtually have no group homes, and New Hampshire had to have very, very small group homes, no home with more than 3 people. Of course, they only have 2,000 people with developmental disabilities in each of those states, and it's smaller than any one of our areas of New York State. But it's just a distinction between where we were at the time. We were still building houses and day treatment programs. We just switched to, when we embraced the waiver, we became IRAs, individualized residential alternatives, and day rehabilitation, and we continued to expand those options and really did not embrace the waiver the way we could have, and it was an opportunity that we missed, and we could have done more of, and we didn't. And then another thing that we worked on a lot in the self-advocacy was trying to develop the opportunities for self-direction, and I think it's well understood that we failed as a system to create an easy-to-access process for self-direction, including opportunities through traditional providers for people to self-direct. We supposedly have about 7,000 people now self-directing. We could have had many more people in much more innovative situations. We have many people doing interesting things through the waiver and in their home community, and but we have to do a lot more of that in order to meet some of the needs that people have, what people want, and also what the federal government's asking us about. So why don't you move the next slide? So here's a slide. I just pause for a second. Did anybody have any questions, or am I going too fast, or am I doing okay? I'll just check in.
I don't see any questions. And if anyone wants me to unmute them, just raise your hand.
I'll just pause for a second.
I don't see anybody raising their hand.
Okay, so I'm just going to take that as a go, and give me a chance to stop a little bit. There's a lot to cover here, and hopefully we will get to some questions.
Well, so, Steve, if you wouldn't mind, I'll point one thing out for the Money Follows the Person. Sure. For the Open Doors program, this wheel power, this really does represent what we're trying to do as transition specialists, that we are trying to look at the whole person and make sure that all of these pieces are part of that plan to have the person move to a community setting. So this is a good rubric to look at and say, have we covered all these different areas?
Great. Yeah, jump in anytime with that, with Sue. So here's a statement, and this actually is probably I don't know if anybody could guess what 91 and 99% is, but I'll tell you. This is how we currently spend our resources. 91% on more traditional group living situations, and 9% on people to own and control their own places. And approximately 91%. Oh, it's probably actually more than 91% in terms of actual employment. And 9% might be what we spend on all of the. Actually, I was corrected recently about this number. I got this number from Jim Moran, who used to work for OPWDD about 5 years ago. So it's probably not exactly accurate percentage-wise, but it's not off by much. And in fact, it might be less than 9% in terms of what we spend on actual employment right now. And I think that it's obviously what we need to do as a system is begin to reverse those percentages, just as we have to reverse the amount of people who are living in large settings and the amount of people who are spending their days in large settings during the day. So next slide. So here's one of the things that when we've been doing this presentation, and I hope this is helpful to people. You may know all this, but it's been difficult since 2008 to move forward with a creative agenda and the one that we are hard pressed to move forward. And here are some of the things, and you guys could probably all add something to this list. But these are some of the things that we've observed. But the fiscal crisis in the United States has not took a bunch of money out of our systems, maybe not so much out of our systems, but certainly hasn't been enabled our systems to grow very much financially, and that continues to this day. The fiscal crisis in the United States is, well, I mean, I'm not going to weigh into that to any great extent, but I don't think anybody, people might feel that there's a recovery, but in terms of human services, it hasn't impacted human services, and the kinds of things that we might have been able to do if we had a robust economy. The New York Times articles and the Poughkeepsie Journal articles still have an impact on our state. New York Times talked about abuse. The Poughkeepsie Journal articles really ended up triggering a lot of the challenge that we have with CMS. They confronted CMS about the cost of services at both the state-operated facilities and provider-run facilities, ICFs and IRAs, group homes and day services, and were very aggressive, and that created a lot of, the New York Times created a lot of concerns about the safety within our system, much of which many of us believe was unfair, although there were certainly issues. And the Poughkeepsie Journal article really pushed the issue of funding, and it was Mary Beth Pfeiffer's article, the Poughkeepsie Journal, that triggered, and her dogged chasing down of CMS and asking questions about rates that triggered a lot of the CMS discussions or points of view, at least towards OPWDD services, and at least that's our opinion on that. So in CMS is also a big part of the challenge right now. Their expectations, their view of our state. Again, we personally, as an organization, our organization likes to point out all the really good things that are happening, and it's just lots of people getting fantastic services through OPWDD, both in group living situations and also in the individualized supports that we've been able to develop thus far. And we think there's lots of good stories to tell. It's not all, the New York Times was really unfair, we think. They didn't tell any story, one story about people living a good life, and there are many, many, many people, even in the group homes, that we're trying to change, and certainly this Mary Beth Pfeiffer, we sent her a whole bunch of things to talk about that were going on positively, and she didn't include any of those things, like people having choices and the people that we knew who were living in places that they chose. The things that are possible and the things that we're moving forward doing now. So CMS is a big issue, of course, and their insistence on OPWD's change and transformation, and some of the things that they're doing nationally as well. There have been and continue to be numerous OPWD leadership changes and retirements. Just so many key staff have left OPWDD. It's one of the challenges. This is not a criticism of any particular staff person. Certainly not a criticism of the current leadership. It's just simply a fact. There has been a dramatic turnover. Most of it was predictable. State service makes it difficult to hire people sometimes with experience, and it's just, I think if anybody disagrees with that, I'd love to hear it. But for those of us in the field, the amount of change at OPWDD is a factor. The home and community-based settings rule, and probably in all state government, likely, the home and community-based settings rule is a huge challenge for OPWDD. Self-advocacy has written a bunch of documents about this. We believe that OPWDD is truly challenged to really, we're not sure how OPWDD will be able to respond to what we see as a huge challenge to the large homes that we have, and just as big a challenge to the day services that we provide. We have 32,000 people who attend rehabilitation centers every day. Some of them are large. There's one right here in the Capital District that is 250 people with a workshop attached, and we have many places in our state that we cannot see how they will comply with CMS's rule, it's going to be a real challenge. Our belief as an organization is that this is and I'll probably get to this a little bit later, is that this is a generational thing. And again, we go back to the legacy issue. How did this happen? How did this occur? Why are we the way we are as a state? And what do we do to begin to give people the kind of supports they're looking for in 2015, 16, and on into the future. And then there's managed care. I say the waiver, but that's how some of us used to call managed care. We see managed care as a challenge. I know that there are folks in DOH and OPWD on the call. We know that this is Clint Perrin and I are on the transformation committee. We understand that this is direction of the state, despite and we know that, but we don't understand it yet. We don't see how it's going to work. We're concerned about it. We want to understand it. We want to try to make it work if this is the direction. But there is many things to be looked at. We are not aware of any state where the waiver has enhanced the lives of people with developmental disabilities, and we want to make sure if we do managed care that we do it in a way that people's lives are improved and that people are supported to live in the communities that they choose with the supports that they need, and that the system is financially stable as well. We know that's an important goal of the managed care. That we like the idea of, but those are our challenges. Person-centered planning is a critical part, and this is I put this in because this is an expectation of CMS, but it's also been an expectation of OPWDD, and it's something that SANYS has been working on for many years. So here's a quote from the ACL blog, which is Association on Community Living. I highlighted one piece of it, and I'll just read it quick. Person-centered planning is a process directed by the person with long-term support needs. The person-centered planning approach identifies the person's strengths, goals, preferences, needs, both medical and HCBS, and desired outcome. The role of staff, family, and other team members is to enable and assist the person to identify and access a unique mix of paid and unpaid services to meet their needs and to provide support during planning and implementation. We call person-centered planning in this whole process the circle of support and the individualized support plan, and it's a very important, it's critical to CMS. They are going to be looking for this, but it's also something that we need. That's the only way we're going to be able to support people to create the kinds of services they want is through person-centered planning, and it's something that we have to invest more time and more money in our state. Person-centered planning is a process. It's not you call up a meeting, you have a meeting, and you make a decision about a person. Person-centered planning involves, a good support person assisting a family and their chosen friends and relatives and people in their life who they choose to help them create and envision the future that they want and develop a set of supports and services to move in that goal. Again, looking at strengths and their preferences and their needs. But the unique mix of paid and unpaid services is one of the ways that CMS sees, I believe, that CMS believes that states like New York and other states will be able to meet the needs of some of the people that are not served, and supporting people to have a mix of paid and unpaid services. In order to do that, people have to be out in the community, they have to meet people, create friends, and that's where the unpaid services come from, from the people that get to know people and choose to be in their lives. And that's something that we have a lot to do in New York State. Next slide. So this is just a slide to keep pushing the point of view, that keep the people first promise. We need to spend all system funds in a people first way. In all decisions about money, be sure that people and their families' needs are the first priority. It seems like an obvious one, but we're going to say that all the time. It's just a very important part of the people first point of view. Here's a statement about SANY's view of CMS and the situation with CMS. CMS is right to challenge states like New York to develop truly integrated settings and communities. CMS is wrong, and we think that they know that, to expect OPWD to transform in 4 short years. I spoke to somebody from CMS 2 years ago, and they told me that, and I asked them, do you think that 18,500 people could move into the community in 4 years? And the person said, absolutely not, but if we must see progress. So we say New York is upside down compared to some other states in the way we currently support people, and we need to make a lot of progress at CMS and then campaign for a reasonable timeline. It's going to be really hard for us to convince CMS to be flexible about future services without them seeing us with a pathway towards the type of change, and it's going to take a while. Next slide. So here's some questions among many we might be asking right now. Next slide. We are focused on system change, but we are missing an important question in the process of complying with CMS. What does the future of our system of support look like for people with developmental disabilities and their family? And specifically, and this is one perspective, one way to think about this, it's not just about what CMS wants. What can a 10-year-old boy or girl with developmental disabilities expect for support when they are 25? So one reason why this is an important question is because this is a system that we need to create, the system that kids in school now want. If you ask a 19-year-old if he wants to move in with 12 other people, or if he wants to spend his or her day in a place with 100 people or 25 people or 50 people, or live in a 12-person house, that's not their vision. Their vision is living in their community. Their vision is having a place of their own, even if they have to share it with people they choose to live with. That's the vision. That's what we have to create as a system. That's vision for those kids, and that's going to take a while. And probably complying with CMS for our state is going to take a 10-year period. We have to make progress so that we can negotiate that if we can. Next slide. And here's two other what we think are very important questions, and I'm glad to hear there's some folks from DOH and OPWD on the phone, but we've been saying this publicly. But where will the funds come from to support the needs of people who are now and will be waiting for services and support? We are a system right now that in this past year we've been able to fund some people with emergency needs. I think we placed 891 people this year. Most of those were people who had some emergency or very high priority needs. We need to be a system that can support people not just based on emergencies. Some of the families are saying, and I can't quote this. I can't give you a personal example of this, but people are saying that it's you have to have a heart attack to get into a OPWD system. I'm not saying that, but even the thought of that is not something that should be acceptable to us. We need enough support. We need enough supports for people as they're ready and as they grow up in their families' homes, as they're ready for their own place. We need to find a way to do that. And I think another important question related to this and related to this whole discussion is where will the funds come from to support the cost of OPWD's transformation? OPWDD is upside down. People are living in large houses. Many people are living in houses. There are at least 550 people living in places with 80, 196. There's 5 or 10 houses. We've got some we got some other places that are very inconsistent with CMS's points of view. So a lot of change has to happen in these directions. So I'm not sure if I have another slide. I think that might be the last slide. So questions?
Does anybody have any questions? Again, if you use the raise the hand function, I can unmute you and you can ask your questions. Steve, I'll just point out that really what OPWD is doing in this whole transformation is very closely related to the goal of MFP or Open Doors, and that is
absolutely. Right, absolutely.
To help people be in the community and be fully integrated into the community. So it's a good match.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. That's a challenge. The challenge with that is how do you view a 12-person house? I mean, we have, again, those 12-person houses are legacies of the past. I ran 2 12-person houses when I was the executive director. Many of the people living in those houses are profoundly disabled. In fact, I brought people with the self-advocates when I first started working for SANYS to some houses so they themselves could meet some people who are living in some of the houses because many people had not met people who had those kinds of challenges. And the new thinking about services have to be from those folks. And I think that when you look at CMS's HCBS settings rule, they apply to 12-person homes, and they look at our system of 12-person homes in other states too. Many states have, Ohio has a bunch of 15-person houses, but those houses are very, very hard. It's hard to see provide truly integrated opportunities for people to have access to the community, including people who don't speak for themselves, and you don't see in the communities outside of groups. And it's a challenge for us. How do we help those folks as individuals to get connected to people in their community so that people are part of their circle, part of their long-term support group, people who are there for them when they have meetings and planning groups. That's a real challenge for us, for our system, and it's when CMS talked about what they were looking at, we agreed with this. We just think it's going to take us a long time. One of the things they said is that people who are living in settings have to have similar access to the community as people who are receiving home and community-based services at home. And just imagine how challenging that's going to be for OPWD's 12-person houses and much larger houses, and OPWD's day services. It's just a big challenge, So, and I think the money follows the person part is one of the important ways of achieving that. Having people have a pot of dollars that are available to them, and choosing to, in self-direction, we have some wonderful examples of people who have pooled those dollars and are living together. 3 ladies out in Rochester I'm thinking about right now. They all use motorized wheelchairs and communication devices. They moved into a house that one of the ladies' families made available to them that they're helping pay off with some of their dollars, and they're sharing staff. It's a self-directed group, and they have to buy the foods. They have to chip in food separately because of the way Medicaid works. But they're living essentially in a situation like many people in America are living. We're young people who have to live together, and they are hiring their own staff and creating a life together for now, and that could change. One of them may move out sometime. Somebody else could move in. Who knows? But they have a lot of choices and a lot of control over their life, and including hiring the people that support them. And that's what we need to be promoting to the greatest extent possible.
All right, Steve. I don't see any questions, and no one's raised their hand. Did you have any final comments?
Well, I just encourage I think that as a field, we have to look at this as take this seriously. Obviously, I think state agencies are, and I think that we have to we have to make as much progress as we can in the money follows the person point of view, and certainly getting people opportunities to move out of nursing homes as well, and really understanding that the way we provide services right now to people with disabilities in New York, especially people with developmental disabilities, is upside down from the way people with developmental disabilities can be supported and want to be supported. And it's not something that's going to happen in 4 years. It's going to take us some time, and we need to find some resources to stimulate this change. You can't do this without some additional resources. Resources meaning money. We got to work out housing issues. We've got to figure out some of the transportation issues that are involved. But we know how to do it in our state. I could show you examples of everything that we're talking about, probably in New York, just as good as in any other states. In fact, we have better examples than some states. Recently, people were comparing Vermont to New York. And by the way, Vermont and New Hampshire closed their institutions with the waiver. I mean, they used the waiver to make that happen. I mentioned that earlier. But Vermont uses I have very good friends with people in Vermont. Vermont uses one model. They use you can only get life sharing. You can't do group living in New York, in Vermont. In fact, I had a woman from Rutland call me maybe 6 months ago, who asked me, how do you get CSS, which for people who don't know is Consolidated Supports and Service Self-Direction. This is a year ago maybe. And how do I get that in Rutland? I said, well, first of all, you have to move to New York and try to get on a waiting list, or you have to change the law in your state, which says people can't live in group living situations of any kind. And that was one of their decisions when they closed their institutions. But right now, life sharing involves having somebody live with you in your house, which is a very good option. And we should be making that. We we don't make that work in New York very well. We should make that work, but that's not the best model to have or the only model to have, because you have a lot of turnover when you have that happen, especially when you're hiring young people to do that. So it's a good option, but not the option to build your entire system on. So we have the capacity, and I mean that. I'm an optimist. I think we can create a really vibrant system of the future with the resources we have, but it's going to take a lot of work and commitment, and it's going to take some money to stimulate it, and it's going to take some legislation and government effort, and it's going to take CMS to accept some of the progress we've made. So we need to make that progress, but accept some of the progress we've made, and know it might take us a little bit longer as a state because of the amount of people that are living in places. You can't just put people out in the street. That's nobody's intention. And person-centered planning in and of itself is a time-consuming process, and it's one that leads to a place that people choose, a life that they want in their community, with the people that they want to live with the people that they want to support them. And that's the goal, and that's something that we're going to have to make happen for people. So thanks so much for letting me. Yep.
You have a question from Vanessa. Vanessa, you can go ahead and talk.
Yes, hi, Steve. I'm sitting here and I'm wondering, what is your vision to see this progress forward? So if you have specifics, that would really be wonderful. I'd love to hear those.
Okay, so I mean, I think that we have a vision. Our organization and other organizations. Our organization's vision is that we use person-centered planning with, basically, we should be looking at our system right now, and anybody who wants to make a change in their life, from who's living in a provider's house or a state-operated facility, people who come forward say they want to do something different, we should be finding a way to support those folks right now. Right now we're assessing in our state. We are assessing where people live, and then we're going to make some decisions about that in a couple of, we have just a short period of time to satisfy CMS. And again, it shouldn't be about satisfying CMS only, but I think that what we need to do to move forward and to gain some credibility with the federal government and to get some momentum for ourselves is for the people who want to live in a different place, the people who are going to be losing opportunities to be in workshops, all of those folks are able to get to do things in communities outside of certified settings to the greatest extent possible, to get as much opportunities going right now, so that first of all, so that we advance and begin to accelerate the amount of change in New York, and then so that we can have the argument that we are learning, making progress, and it's going to continue to take us some time. So and we need to look at all the different ways to do it, and we have many of them. Self-direction. Services using the waiver, current waiver services creatively. There's just lots of ways to do this, and people do not have to live in group homes, and people definitely do not have to be in segregated day services or workshops, and they're not going to have that opportunity. People want to work, people want to live in their own home, and be supported to do that. So I think we need to get to it.
All right, thank you, Vanessa. That was a good question.
Did I answer your question, Vanessa?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I actually was looking for really specifically what needs to change in the whole overall picture. And
well, in the overall picture, I think this is where we end. We're talking about the money follows the person. The more we align dollars for people with people that they can make decisions about how to spend, even if they spend that by contributing that into a budget with some other people that they choose to live with or to do something during the day with. There might be some people are spending their days doing self-directed things. We have, as a system, have to create as flexible a way of doing it. So, for instance, in self-direction, it's better the way we have it set up now, but it's still very complicated. So, for example, if you are living, I'm going to give you a specific example that keeps people from doing some of the things they want. If you're living in an IRA, your only option for self-directed services is 6 hours a week, is a day, or 30 hours a week, because in IRA, one of the rules that we have is that people, and this is a federal rule the CMS has, is that you can't bill 2 waiver services at the same time. So self-direction is a waiver, and people who live in IRAs are a waiver. We've had some people recently who had self-directed services throughout their day doing really interesting things. Kenny Berg, I'll just say Kenny, I forget the last name, but you can see him in the We Have Choices of PowerPoint that we have. Kenny works on a farm in New York City. He gets 8 hours of service every single day. He is profoundly disabled man. He needs one-on-one support, but he found something that he is good at doing. He loves to take the eggs from the chicken coop. He's very careful with them. He cleans the chicken coops that are on this thing, and the farm, which is also a museum of sorts, loves Kenny. And recently, he had to move into an IRA. So because he had been living at home since many years, and his mother was ready for Kenny to live in his own. He has a 1-person IRA he's living in. Because he's living in an IRA, and because the IRA hours are 24 hours on Saturday and 24 hours on Sunday and 18 hours on the weekdays, he can only get reimbursed for his day service 6 hours a day. Kenny don't like change. Kenny wants to work 8 hours a day. He doesn't want to go home at 3 o'clock or whatever the time it is that they want him to go home now. We have got to figure out how to create a system that is flexible to support people to do the things they want to do at the time they want to do it. Another example of the same issue is a man named Henry, who is also in Willowbrook. Henry is a person who depends on people for everything he does in his life. He uses a motorized wheelchair. But Henry is a brilliant man. He's created a PowerPoint about his life. He has a beautiful synthetic voice that he uses to tell his story, and then people who know him help him answer questions about his story. He was doing that PowerPoint to Rotary clubs and things in lots of places in the evening, traveling around. He and his wife had to move into an IRA because of their needs. They're in an IRA. Now they have that same constraint. He can't get the services, the supports he needs to do the extra things he wants to do because he lives in a house with a bunch of other people. We've got to figure this stuff out. We've got to get our system out of the way of the supports that people need. And it's going to take time, but we've got to make progress. We've got to create a self-direction model that's even more flexible than the one we have. We've got, for instance, if Kenny lived in a self-directed house, it would be, and had the same money that an IRA would pay for his house, he could live in a self-directed situation. But we have some limitations in the amount of funds we're willing to pay for somebody to live in a self-directed situation. So there's rules that we need to figure out, that we need to get out of the way, and we need to find ways to make it easy for people. And we've got to find, and quite frankly, and I know this isn't popular with the state right now, we don't understand how we're going to do this without some infusion of dollars to stimulate the transformation, which we know is totally against the grain of thought in terms of the funding situation in our state. But in terms of satisfying, not satisfying CMS, really. I don't want to keep going back to that. In terms of giving people the kinds of supports they need to create the system that we need for the future, we need to be investing. That's why we talk about reinvesting. So I think that's just one example, but there are many examples. People need jobs. When people move out of workshops, for instance, we cannot let one person move from a workshop to a day hub unless that's their absolute only thing that they want to do. We need to offer people employment, and employment that can be supported using the waiver dollars that would be able to be matched to somebody who moves out of a workshop. We have enough people in segregated situations, and we have to begin to find some way to get people living in the community and working in the community. So that's just a couple of specifics.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. And that will conclude our webinar for today. And as I said, we will, Vanessa, you have something else?
Not me. I have one of my staff people here has a question.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Tracy, and I work as an advocate here, but I'm also the parent of somebody who receives services through OPWDD. And I think I'm in a unique position because I just am privy to more information. And my adult son receives, I believe through the ISS route, a rent subsidy, and we're also working towards the Home of Your Own but with that program. But my concern is just this past week, you know, these are efforts made through OPWDD to, you know, make it so my son can live in the community in the way that he wants. But I just received an action alert that those funds are not going to be ongoing. So, you know, he has this rent subsidy that would ultimately be a mortgage subsidy, but if that disappears, being you know, having a disability income solely is going to be a problem not only for him, but I'm sure many other people down the road. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I mean, I think the answer has to be that we need a consistent funding source that's individualized for people who want those types of services, and we think a lot of people are going to want those types of services. That's dependable. That addresses housing. We need a lot more affordable housing in our state, and a housing that is scattered throughout communities, so that people aren't living in institutional kinds of settings. You know, some of the housing we've created in the past that had those qualities. So, I mean, I think I'll go back to the 90-10 thing. You know, one of the thing that you could look at the 90% and 10 thing, and this is sort of a side way of answering your question. We're going to get what we pay for as a system. Right now, we pay for people to be and spend most of our resources on people to be in large facilities and large day facilities. You know, until we begin to transform, rethink, change how we spend that money and make that money available for people to live in their own places and take advantage of the subsidies and the community members and friendships that they can gain by being in the community and out and about with people. Until we make that easy and dependable, first of all, people are going to be scared to choose those things. So if a person gets something and then it's not able to continue the funding, that's only going to turn people off towards self-directed services. People need to know that there's a pathway to this and a sustainable way of providing the services that people need. And you know, I just think that we have to keep moving forward with this, and I hope your son can get exactly what he needs and wants in the community, and you and he both can have the comfort of knowing that it's going to be there continuously for him throughout his life. You know, and if things change for him, his services can change. And I think that's a commitment that we have to make sure that the government, and I can tell you that our government wants to make that commitment. I'm not saying that they don't by this statement, but I think we have to make sure that the commitment is one that we can make happen. And I think we go back to that me to we statement that we made in the beginning. We all have to find, me to we is about people getting the supports that they need and sharing as well. And so we just got to find some ways to keep the pressure on and pay attention to OPWD's transformation plan, go to all the hearings, make all the comments. The commissioner and the panel members are going to listen and hear, and we're going to use those things to create our transformation plan. And I think that just keep advocating, keep speaking up, keep giving examples of the things that your son wants, and push back, push back. Give us a call. I'll try to help you. Give me a call at Self-advocacy. We'll try to put you in touch with people.
All right, Steve. We're a little bit over the time, so I think that will be the last. What? That'll be the last word. But I do thank you very much. Your input is always valuable, and have a good day.
Hey, thanks a lot, Susan. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening.